om hier te wees, maar voor ek verder aangaan met die verwelkoming, wil ons net die dag op die regte wyse begin. Ek het oor die naweek bietjie gedink, ons gaan redelik hoor oor vrugbaarheid of fertility van PJ, en toe het ek nou gedink om daarby aan te sluit, hoe gaan ons berigtinge begin? En toe het ek in Genesis 1, waar die skepping plaasgevind het ek hierdie stuk gekry. Genesis 1 vanaf vers 24. En God het gesê, laat die aarde lewende wesens voortbring, ooreenkomstig hulle soorte, vee, kruipende diere en wilde diere, van die aarde ooreenkomstig hulle soorte. En dit was so, en God het die wilde diere van die aarde gemaak ooreenkomstig hulle soorte, en die vee ooreenkomstig hulle soorte, en al die diere wat op die aarde kruip, ooreenkomstig hulle soorte. Toe het God gesien dat dit goed was. Vers 28. En God het hulle geseën, en God het vir hulle gesê, wees vrugbaar en vermeerder en vul die aarde, onderwerp dit en heers oor die visse van die see en die voëls van die hemel en oor die diere wat op die aarde kruip. Ek wil by een woordjie vashak, waar daar 'n opdrag was, wees vrugbaar, die woord vrugbaar. In die Strongs, oorspronklik in die Hebreëus, wys die woord vrugbaar as para. Nou dit beteken by definition, to bear fruit, to be fruitful, to cause to bear fruit, to make fruitful, to show fruitfulness. By definition, bring forth, cause to be, make fruitful, grow or increase. As ou dan sien hierso, waar dit staan, to cause to be, to make fruitful, is dit werkwoorde, en ek dink dit gaan baie aansluit, waar ons rentmeesterskap hier op aarde moet uitdien, hoe ons vandag by PJ gaan leer, hoe om ons diere vrugbaar te teel en funksioneel te teel. So in daai gedagte sien ons uit na PJ se praatjie net nou, waar hy vir ons ook gaan vertel, as deel van die skepping, hoe om vrugbaar te wees. Sluit net die oë. Ons almagtige Vader, Vader, ons dankie dat ons hier as 'n boeregemeenskap so kan saam wees in gesondheid en krag. Vader, ons staan hier op 'n brink van 'n nuwe seisoen, waar ons al plekke reën gekry het, waar die grasspruitjies uitspruit, waar ons nuwe lewe kan sien. Vader, ons wil vra dat U hierdie seisoen vir ons boere sal seën, dat ons ook vrugbaar sal wees en ook in U rentmeesterskap sal vermeerder, to cause to be fruitful. Ons almagtige Vader, seën hierdie verrigtinge vandag, en lei ons boet en bewaar ons, waar ons later weer uitmekaar sal gaan, laat ons veilig weer by ons bestemming sal uitkom. U naam ontwil. Amen. Dus, ek gaan hierdie net uithaal. Namens Uitkyk Studiegroep, PJ, it's a privilege to have you here today, and we're looking forward for what you have in store today for us. Aan al ons B-studielede, dis lekker om 'n vergadering met so baie mense te sien, en nie net so 20 of 30 nie, so ek sal nogal daarvan hou as elke vergadering amper met 'n saal vol mense kan sit. Maar baie welkom aan al ons lede, aan nuwe gesigte, aan die gaste hier vandag, wat die eerste keer 'n studiegroep vergadering bywoon. Baie welkom. En dan aan ons borgers wat die dag vandag moontlik gemaak het. Ek wil 'n spesiale welkom aan julle heet, en dan wil ek julle sommer by name noem. Louis van Brad van Afri Wet, Matthew van Tonder, Alpha Agri, Koos Joubert van Belfast Slaghuis, Supervleis, Dani Hatting van Biominerale, Rocco van Rooyen en Gerrit Marits van BKB, Hannes Swart van Blinkwater Slaghuis, Simone Swart en Nelius van Blinkwater Veevoere, Stanley Blout van NBM, Dr. Marlene van Central Wet, Albertyn van Hypra, Natasha Botha van HRA Makelaars, John Miller van Jacob Dexters, Flippie van der Merwe van Karoo Oes, Marianne de Bruin van Meerkat Online Platform, wat ook vandag die uitsending behartig, wat ook 'n aanlyn uitsending gaan wees, en daar gaan ook 'n opname na die tyd wees vir die wat julle dit wil soek. En dan Miller Hansen en Kneer Geldenhuys van Mpumalanga Brangus Genootskap, Fanie Barnard van MSD, Etienne van Tonner, Lelani Hansing van MS Trading Fitech, Matthys Jonker van Nutrifeed, Pieter Lee van Ubaru, Ernest Raaf van TWK, PJ Cornelius en Morney van Rensburg van VKB, Renier Armse van Voermol, Janus van Rooyen van Zoetis, André Storm van Ilanko. Dis 'n mondvol, maar baie dankie en baie welkom vir julle borge hier vandag. As daar iemand is wat ek van dalk uitgelaat het, dan is dit per ongeluk en nie as prins nie, dan vra ons byvoorbeeld om verskoning. Vandag het ons geen notiele nie, ons is hierso om na PJ te luister, maar ons het net 2 hoofborge wat deel het in die dag vandag, en dit is TWK en Karoo Oes. Ons wil hulle net dan gou die geleentheid gee vir Jannie Burger van TWK om homself voor te stel en bietjie meer oor TWK vir ons te gesels. Jannie, die vloer is joune.
Baie dankie, geagte voorsitter, boere, gaste. Dis vir my voorreg om te kom gesels vandag met julle, net 'n vinnige oorsig te gee waaroor TWK gaan en wat ons doen. Ons wortels is ingepalm so in 1940, waar ons gestig is Transvaalse wattelkwekers. Ons bedrywighede in die landbouinsette en graanbedrywighede, verskaf ek vir saad, kunsmis, gewas, beskerming en veevoere. Bemarking van graan, oliesade, as ek sterk verteenwoordigheid in die sojaboon, mielies en voerbemarking. Ekskuus. TWK speel 'n groot rol in voerkraal en veevervaardiging met produkte soos grainfeed en winterveld. Ons is dan ook in die bosboubedryf, waarvan ons een van die grootste verskaffers van rondehout en sappie, masonite en papier in die papierindustrie is. In die mechanisasiekant is ons wel bekend as die Holland diensverskaffers en dan is ons ook betrokke by die versekering, finansiering en kredietfasiliteite, waar ek en Ines baie betrokke is. Dis kan ons sê dat TWK is ekskuus. Kort kan ons sê dat ons in 'n wêreld waar ons landbou onder konstante druk is deur klimaat, politiek, is ons ek is jammer daaroor. Is ons dankie, ek sal 'n bietjie slukkie water vat, skus.
Ja, ons gee Jannie net 'n oomblik dat hy net sy asem skep. Ek dink DWK is algemeen bekend as produk en handelaar in die omgewing, so as julle met hulle wil praat, ek dink hulle gaan na die tyd ook hier wees wat ons lekker kan gesels saam met hulle en lekker kan kuier. Is jy reg om aan te gaan?
Ja, ek dink soos hy sê, soos 'n strategiese vernoot vir die boer, nie net 'n diensverskaffer nie, om by te dra en deel te wees van u besigheid. Dankie.
Baie dankie. Terwyl Flippie van Karoo Oes, wat ons mede hoofborg is, na vore kom, julle hier is koeldranke en sap hier voor, daar in die koelers is ook koeldranke, daar is bier. Asseblief, moenie droomond hier sit nie, julle is welkom om op te staan gedurende die tyd. Kry vir julle iets om te drink. Badkamers is heel agter, heel in die hoek is die mans en net die een voor dit is die dames. Flippie, ons luister na jou.
Dankie Michiel. Goeiemiddag aan almal wat ek nog nie gegroet het nie. Soos Michiel gesê het, ek Flip van der Merwe van Karoo's Veilings. Ons hou weekliks veilings op Witbank en op Woensdae en op Ermelo op Donderdae hou ons veilings, veeveilings. Ja, ek weet baie van die kere en mense dink hulle is ver en hulle is uit ons wijk uit hierdie kant. Dames en here, gee ons asseblief 'n lei, praat met ons. Transport is ook nie altyd die grootste faktor nie. Transport kan gereël word. Ons het ook van ons eie trokke waarmee ons die boere graag help. Ek dink veilings is 'n redelike belangrike ding in die vergadering waarin ons is. Ons weet almal die voerkrale en so aan en almal het hulle direkte lyne met daai manne wat direk op die plase kom laai en so aan. Maar ek dink die dinamika van die veilings is besig om so te verander dat die pryse op die veilings is nie altyd die tweede beste nie. So ja, ek dink ons gaan ook 'n interessante prentjie vorentoe sien oor veilings met die feit dat Back and Claw sy maak. Ons weet nie regtig wat gaan daar gebeur nie. Ons weet nie wat die regering se hand in dit sal wees nie. Maar ek dink in die verdere toekoms sal veilings meer oop wees en voerkrale meer veilings ook ondersteun en ek dink dit sal 'n groot impak op ons prys en op ons algemene veebedryf hê. Maar ja, soos ek sê, ons is Witbank Karoo's. Praat met ons gerus, Google ons, soek ons name en ons borde oral op. Reël met ons, boek. Veiling is 'n maklike ding. Jy stuur jou bees, kry jou geld, ons gaan aan met ons lewens. Baie dankie vir die geleentheid, dankie vir Uitkyk Studiegroep vir die geleentheid om hier te kan wees. Dankie Michiel.
Baie dankie, Flip. And now for our main event, PJ Budler. PJ Budler was raised on a 5th generation cattle operation in South Africa. So he's actually a South African. At age 15, he founded Bonhaven Beef Cattle. Between 1996 and 2012, he grew Bonhaven to 5 locations in 3 different countries. The Hereford, the Angus, Red Angus, Bradford and Brahman herds achieved much success, winning numerous national shows and setting auction records on this continent. In 2012, PJ relocated to Texas, USA, where he is the international business manager for a Trans-Ova Genetics. For a second, I thought you were in the human trafficking as well. This position, together with running the Animal Champion of the World competition, judging shows, speaking at events, and doing cattle consulting, has taken him to 48 US states and 122 different countries thus far. He has judged 107 different cattle breeds in 50 countries. I don't even think we have 20 different breeds in this study group. In 2017, PJ became the first to ever judge a national show on all 6 continents. This is truly remarkable, and we are privileged to have a man of your stature here today. We are looking forward, PJ, for what you will present us today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and Michiel, thank you for this opportunity, and to the sponsors. I'm on a bit of a road trip at the moment. I was in the Azores Islands in Portugal. The event I went to do there got cancelled by a hurricane, and because of that, I had to visit about 20 different farms on those islands, selecting cattle on the farms, and then went to Uitkyk after that for 3 days and stood in that Namibian sun, and had a nice drive this morning out here into Mpumalanga from Joburg. And I won't lie to you, when I woke up this morning, I felt empty. I didn't feel like I thought, I know these Mpumalanga farmers, they know what they're doing. I don't know if they need to hear from an Eastern Cape farmer from the mountains. And so you guys are going to have to help me get some confidence back here, because the Portuguese gave me a hard time. They didn't like my idea of moderate framed functional cattle. They like big cattle. And the Namibians gave me a hard time because Germans are tough. So you might need to help me build my confidence back. But seriously, this is a huge honor, and I'm still amazed that anyone wants to listen to this. But some of the things we'll talk about today, you might not agree with, and they might not even be 100% right, and I might disagree with myself in a few years' time. But what I'm proposing is we've got to let ideas stand on their own merit. We have to let ideas be spoken about, and the ideas must compete. Not the people who are bringing the ideas, but the ideas themselves. Because I think in cattle farming, in agriculture, and in life in general now, there's certain ideas that aren't allowed to be spoken about. There's certain ideas that are taboo, and there's sacred cows that you're not allowed to slaughter. We're going to slaughter some sacred cows today, because I think no idea must be privileged above another idea. They need to stand on their own merit. What I would like is, if there are any specific topics you guys want to address, I think let's make it an open forum. And there's a good chance that I won't know a good answer to it, but I guarantee you there's someone in this room who does have a good answer to those topics. And it can be broad. We're going to cover a lot of bases today. Some of them are going to be very specific on breeding productive functional cattle. Others are going to be more broad in dealing with stuff that influences us and our ability to stay on the land producing these productive functional cattle. So if you guys are comfortable with it being an open forum, I'd like that, if we can have a back and forth. And at any point, if you put your hand up, it'd be nice to have your interjection, and you might say, no, you're off track there, or yes, but what about that? And then we can open it up. Is that okay? Can we do that? I apologize for my lack of Afrikaans. Ek is eintlik vlot, maar ek klink soos 'n rooi nek en julle gaan vir my lag, so ek gaan terugslaan Engels toe. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide there. The introduction, I think, all our slides are blank now. Michiel, this is going to be a fascinating talk if all these slides are blank. Anyway, this is just a list of references and mentors and influences, and a lot of these ideas aren't mine. They're just ideas that I've adopted. Some of them are mine, though they might be the ones you disagree with the most. But the point I want to make here is I think a lot of us tend to have a mentor or a teacher that we listen to and we read their stuff and we prescribe to their views. My encouragement is listen to everyone. Read all the books. Listen to all the speeches and the opinions. Because even the ones you don't agree with will make your opinion stronger. And there might even be ways in which you might refine what your opinion or your view or your philosophy is on things by having a lot of teachers and make sure your teachers don't all agree with each other either, because that's how you open your mind and you become more thoughtful and more honest. And eventually you maximize intelligence that way, I believe. I don't like groupthink. I don't like cult behavior where everyone is lockstep marching together in the same direction and no one's actually thinking. I think that's dangerous. I think that you end up in a little box and eventually that becomes tyrannical and you miss out on a lot of good ideas that are out there. And this is human nature to be in a tribe. You know, we want to be in tribes. But goodness, it's refreshing when you meet someone from a different tribe. And in our industry, it might be a grass-fed guy, and we've always been feedlotting cattle, and we go, wow, these guys aren't actually that crazy. They've got a point. You know, that there is another way to do it. Or it's someone who does high-intensity grazing, and we've done it more conventionally. Or, you know, it's someone who doesn't feed hormones, or someone who's got boron instead of bonsmara, or, you know, I think the more we open this thing up, the more we maximize our intelligence and thoughtfulness on this thing. And that's why a lot of these guys don't agree with each other. And I don't agree with any of these guys on everything. But they've all got something interesting to say. Next slide. Are we hitting blanks here? You know what we must do? I think let's go back to the original. Yeah. I apologize for this. It's not Michiel's fault, I promise you. This is, I think let's do this, and then it's totally, I've never seen this before. Anyway, okay. Okay. Anyway, the next few slides is just pictures of me working with cattle around the world in different scenarios. Let's open it up while I'm chatting here, but yeah. Okay, this is a group of companies that I work with, semen, embryo, colostrum genetics companies that I do international business development for. We can go to the next slide. I just want to give you some context about some of the stuff that I do. Then Global Livestock Solutions is the company that I started for doing consulting and helping government projects or private farmers, commercial farmers, with their genetics, herd selection, and herd management. If we go to the next slide, we'll start working. We've done that one, so let's just start going through these pictures here. This is just me in different places in the world, working with different breeds, and I think this is when I started realizing that there is no one breed that works everywhere. All over the world, there's a slightly different objective, a slightly different set of resources, different environment and climate. And you almost need a different textbook for each one of those scenarios. And then through all these pictures, as we move down them there, Michiel, you'll see that I realized too that there isn't, I became breed agnostic. Like I used to love the breeds that I was breeding with. But soon you realize that it's not actually about breeds at all. It's about types of cattle. You've got really good and bad cattle in every breed. Well, there are a few breeds that I haven't seen any good cattle in, but most breeds have got really good cattle and really bad cattle. And you can breed the right type as long as they're adapted to your management practices and environment with pretty much any of those breeds. So that's maybe a gear change, because one of the most common questions you get asked is, what breed would you breed with if you were me? And I'm like, doesn't matter, just pick your breed and we'll pick the right type. The next slide, this was my first consulting opportunity, and it really was a nice one. I'd just been breeding at that point for about 15 years, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Seychelles was in Pretoria, and I happened to be standing next to him, and he couldn't understand the judge, and we started talking about cattle, and he invited me to Seychelles to consult on his cattle operation. Biggest cattle farmer in the Seychelles. So I got there, and that afternoon we worked through his 22 cows. I had 7 days to work through 22 cows, and they were in this little grass pasture overlooking the Indian Ocean. And after about 2 hours, I'd drawn blanks. There was just no more information I could give him. But I said to him, why do you keep bringing these cattle into their own individual stables each night? Why don't you just leave them out there and save your labor? And the cattle prefer being out there. It'll be better for your pastures. You don't need all this infrastructure. And he said, what do you think we make most of our money with out of these cattle? So I said, well, they're beef cows. So I'm assuming it's beef. So he said, no, every morning, all the resorts and hotels, they come and they scrape all the manure off the concrete, and they use that manure for their vegetable gardens and flower gardens. And then on some of the islands, you're not allowed driving cars, so these bulls pull carts around the island, so we train these oxen or bulls to pull carts. As you can see, that bull going round and round, he's crushing coconuts. They use these bulls as beasts of burden to crush coconuts. They milk the cows each day for the families, for the house. And then at the end of their lives, they harvest them for beef. So that was quite humbling. I learned that lesson very quickly in the Seychelles, that you have to start listening before you start talking. And I try and do that. I mean, obviously, sometimes you get too excited and you jump the gun, but I think that was a very, very good lesson, and ended up sending some cattle from Kenya over there, and it's been a fun little project because you go there for a 7-day work week and you work for one afternoon, and then you've got the beach for the other 6.5 days. This is something to me that is very, very important, and especially the very developed countries, Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, parts of Australia and North America, New Zealand, they've stopped believing this. They've stopped believing that farmers are the real heroes. You know, I do get in trouble sometimes when I say it like this, but we were always taught when we were young, or we still get taught, that the teachers are the real heroes. You know, those teachers, the sacrifices they make and the fact that they raise the next generation and all that, they're the real heroes. My history teacher, Percy Callahan, when he was writing on the chalkboard in chalk, he didn't really cut a very heroic figure, you know. I think the farmers are the real heroes. I mean, the teachers are great, and I think they're wonderful, and I'm glad they exist. My teachers weren't real heroes. I think the farmers are the real heroes because, firstly, 1 to 2% of us feeds 100% of the population. That's superpower status. The second thing is, from the standpoint of decentralizing power, wealth, and influence, the only way in which you get flourishing small towns around the country, and not just one big centralized town, is when you have farmers that live on their land, that send their kids to the local school, that buy at the local grocery stores, use the local hospital, golf club, etc. And those towns flourish because of agriculture. You take agriculture, and I mean privately owned family farms, out of the equation, all the power goes to one big city in a country, and then that one big city determines how the rest of the country lives. There's no vibrancy anywhere else in the country, and you create a tyrannical society. That's amazing. Farmers do that. They decentralize power, wealth, and influence. So that's a very, very important part that farmers and ranchers play. The other one is national security, and I saw this. I clicked a few years ago. I was in Finland, and they've got a long boundary with Russia, and along that boundary or land border, the only activity is cattle farming. Nothing else. There's only cattle farming. And if there weren't cattle farmers there, and I'm using this hypothetically, I'm not saying Russia wants to invade Finland, I'm just saying if they did, Finland would never know, except for the fact that they've got farmers there, and there's road networks, and there's cell phones, and there's electricity lines. So the farmers become witnesses of what's actually going on in that country, where without them, it would be barren. You could have people invading and settling in your country, and you would never ever know about it. So national security, obviously we've spoken about food security. Farmers are the true heroes. And I think that we need to stop apologizing for the way in which we produce food, and rather just start celebrating the fact that we are feeding everyone 3 times a day with a very healthy, nutritious product. This human flourishing value chain, this is why I think we need to be so proud of what we do and push forward and persevere in this endeavor of producing food off the land, and especially producing food using animal proteins. We have to preserve this way of life for the reasons I've just spoken about. But persevering is tough. You know, I don't think there's any other industry that perseveres like farmers do. Through droughts, floods, fires, questionable political decisions, economic downturns, and yet farmers just keep going through that. And what enables them to do that is having productive animals. And we'll speak about productive animals this afternoon and what that actually means, because those productive animals make a profit for the farm and the business. And a profitable farm and a business makes a prosperous community. So that human flourishing value chain, the farmers are a very key part of that. Without the farmers, that value chain is broken. So again, this is like, I make a serious argument when I call farmers superheroes. I'm not joking. I'm not trying to puff us up. I'm serious about it. The next slide. This is I've been using this thing since 2008, I think was the first time I used it, but I still use it with my own farm managers. I used it a lot, and I also used it a lot with new clients. And it was trying to explain how to, from the ground up, build a profitable farming enterprise in the most simplistic way possible, but in a way that many people don't do. When I gave this talk in Russia, and this Russian lady who organized it came to me afterwards and she says, "Why are you insulting our farmers?" I said, "No," I said, I would never insult farmers, ever. It's just not something that I'll ever do, because I'm a fan. I was a player and a fan, and I'm a huge fan of this industry. She said, "But our farmers know all this already. Why are you telling them such simple stuff?" I said, "Because they're not doing it. They might know it, but they're not doing it." So this is very simple, but I believe in the structure. So the Romans or Phoenicians or the Ottomans, when they were building their empires, a lot of them had these walled cities. So they'd have a big city with a wall around it, and the emperor would sit in the middle of the city, or the king, and at each gate in each direction, there'd be a gate where all the goods that were sold out or goods brought in, people moving in and out, would use those gates. But at each gate, they had a gatekeeper, and that gatekeeper's job was to tally and take notes of everything coming in and out of their gate. And every 2 weeks or so, they'd all get together, the gatekeepers, north, south, east, west, with the emperor, and they would explain to the emperor what his world looks like from a 360-degree angle, like a complete overview. Now, the farms are the same. You know, farmers, we sit in the middle of our farm like an emperor or a king. Don't listen to anyone, except for the wife and the bank manager maybe. But we have these hypothetical gates and gatekeepers around that we have to have gatekeepers at these gates to make sure that profit stays in and doesn't run out and income comes in. So we don't have losses, and we keep the income in. And these hypothetical gates, I've narrowed it down to 8. That's not scientific, that's just the way I saw it. There might be 9 or so, I don't know, 7, whatever. But the 8 that I see are genetics, herd management, nutrition, animal health, marketing, record keeping, forage management, and then human capital or human resources. All of them are equal. Like, no one likes doing all that stuff. People prefer certain parts of that. But as long as you've got someone paying attention to each one of those gates, or you paying attention to each one of those gates, that can shore up a business to where you don't suffer those losses that creep out from one of the gates that you're not paying attention to. The wheel is the same concept. I mean, it's a wheel with 8 spokes. They're all equal. If you're missing one or one's longer than the other, it's an uncomfortable ride. Flat tire, vehicle doesn't move forward anymore. So it's pretty much the same idea. So when we get to cattle, now I know you guys didn't come here to listen about Romans and Phoenicians, so we'll talk about cows. When you get to cattle, this might be one area that I might disagree with a lot of the directions that breed societies have taken us in around the world, even some animal scientists perhaps, in the way they rank traits for selection. And my 2-tier ranking for traits is what I call profit traits. That would be adaptability, functional efficiency, fertility, and longevity. Those are the fundamental traits. That's what makes you a profit. Then you've got your turnover traits, the stuff you actually get paid for. Muscle, milk, growth, weight, marbling, those are your turnover traits. Those are very important, but they're totally irrelevant if we don't first pay attention to those fundamental traits. And this is, again, so simple, but not being practiced a lot around the world. And we'll get into some of the unforeseen results of what happens if you don't pay attention to it this way. So we'll just touch briefly on adaptability. On the left there, you see a Nelore herd of cows and calves, perfectly adapted to the tropics. They're found in huge numbers in Brazil. It's humid, there's insects, it's hot, and these cattle work well there. They work well with the predators, perfectly adapted. And then on the right, you see that Highland cow in the Highlands of Scotland. Same thing, perfectly adapted to wind and rain and cold, to very poor forage through the winter. But if you swap them, the Nelore cow in Scotland, just in order to maintain her energy in that cold and wet and that marginal grazing, she would probably eat 3 times as much as a Highland cow just to maintain her condition. She'll live, but she'll be very high maintenance. A Highland cow in the northern parts of Brazil probably has 20 to 30 days to live and she's dead. So adaptability is the gateway trait which through functional efficiency allows cattle to be fertile and have longevity. There is no gate to profitability without adaptability. In the tropics, cattle degenerate. They become tropical degenerates if they're not adapted. And in the temperate areas where it's too cold, if an animal that's not adapted to cold weather, their energy consumption is just so high that they're just not affordable anymore to keep their energy up and their energy requirements up. The next slide shows us, this is an interesting graph here. You know that 70% of the world's cattle are in the tropics. So that's the future. Well, it's the present, but we just don't know it. So now it has to be the future. I'd say with the genetic companies, the major genetics companies in North America and Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, I would say 90 to 95% of all research and development is done on Holstein and Angus, which don't work in the tropics. So there's a big opportunity to do some serious research and development on the tropical breeds that are adapted in the tropics, because it just makes sense from a numbers standpoint. So what is tropical adaptability? Now I know like it's not very tropical here, especially not in the middle of winter, but this is just for interest's sake because a lot of your customers are in more tropical areas. And there are a lot of breeds that claim they can work in the tropics, but this is what makes cattle tropically adapted. So the first thing is body type. As you'll notice, mammals are very different shape in the very temperate cold areas to where they are the closer you get to the equator. So we need to bear that in mind. If you want a huge, heavy structured, big boned, massive animal, it's going to work a lot better in the temperate areas than in the tropics. The second thing is hide color. So Professor Jan Bonsma did, I think, the best work on this anywhere, and he started at Honest Poort with it, finished it at Texas A&M University, where he found that different colors responded different in different environments. So in South Africa, where most of it is like felt, savanna felt type environment, red is a good color for that because it reflects infrared a lot better than black does, but it can also absorb ultraviolet. So it can make use of the ultraviolet, it can reflect the red. What he said about black was interesting. At altitude, black's a very good color because it can utilize that ultraviolet, okay? On the coastline, when you're next to the sea, then when your honey and your straw colors, your silver colors, like the gray Brahmins and their law, that becomes a very good color because the challenge there is not the ultraviolet, it's the infrared, so they can reflect that infrared. So again, horses for courses, adapting colors to these cattle. A slick coat in the tropics, a shiny coat that allows that sebum to reflect more light, and shiny coat reflects more light and also makes it more difficult for parasites to attach. Those subcutaneous muscles on a Bos indicus animal, they can shake their hide in any one place with those subcutaneous muscles to get rid of a tick or a biting insect. That makes them tropically adapted in humid areas. Sebum excretion. The Bos indicus influenced cattle secrete a lot more sebum through their pores. That's a sunscreen, and it's also an insect repellent. If you've worked with pure Brahman cows in a kraal, it's a different smell to working with Bos taurus cows, and that's the amount of sebum that they can secrete. And then surface area of hide or additional sweat glands. The more hide an animal's got, the more it can sweat. Okay, and sweat is how cattle dissipate heat. So the dewlap, the throat latch, extra bit of skin, the loose skin cattle have got, that means they've got more sweat glands. And Bos indicus cattle and Bos indicus derived cattle, composites, have got more sweat glands per square inch than pure Bos taurus cattle. So they can sweat more hide plus more sweat glands per square inch. These are all things to bear in mind for tropical adaptability. Then we get to functional efficiency. So functional efficiency, we'll get a little bit into this too when we talk about balance, but there's so many measures of efficiency. So whether it's cow-calf efficiency, what weight a cow weans of its own body weight, what percentage of its own body weight it weans when the calf is around 7 months old. That's an efficiency measurement. There's feed efficiency, which is more of a terminal trait in a confined area, determine how many kilograms of feed it takes to put on a kilogram of beef. There's so many measures, and we'll go through these sometimes. But with functional efficiency, what I'm talking about is more balance. So it's where all the body parts fit together appropriately and in the right proportion. That balance of the endocrine system, where all the glands are functioning correctly, releasing hormones at the right level, and that expresses itself in the animal's phenotype. It's the balance between muscle, the product we produce, and fat, the energy it takes to produce that product. So in females, estrogen makes fat, so we need females that are full-bodied, well-fleshed, easy-fleshing animals. Is easy-fleshing a term that you guys use in Mpumalanga? You familiar with it? Okay. The Namibians didn't know what I was talking about with it. I had to explain it many different ways. So basically, the animals that get fat first on the veld, okay? So with females, we want those full-bodied, easy-fleshing cattle with some muscle. And with bulls, testosterone makes muscle. So with bulls, we need some muscle shape and some muscle tone, etc. with them, but then still with some cover, because we'll get to fat later and why it's important, but we can't have them free of flesh or free of fat. And then we need hormonal balance, where the bulls are masculine, with some extra strength, extra weight and size, that testosterone flow, and then the females are feminine, ladylike, estrogen flow, faces like little princesses, bums like cooks. That's what a female should look like. So we'll start on fertility, and fertility is the number one profit driver when it comes to analyzing cattle themselves. Okay, so I'm not talking about things like stocking rate. When you're actually looking at the animal itself, fertility is the number one profit driver. It's way more profitable than growth or milk, marbling, muscle, anything, fertility. Okay, and if you measure it correctly, it's highly heritable. So a lot of the textbooks say it has low heritability, but a lot of those textbooks and that research was done in parts of the world where the cattle are overmanaged. If you overmanage cattle, you can make them fertile because they're getting their energy and their fat out of a bag. It's not inherited, through genetics, through their parents. Now, if in responsibly managed cattle areas or undermanaged cattle areas, fertility is highly heritable. And it's a 1 + 1 = 2 equation. It's feminine cows that are easy fleshing are fertile. Masculine bulls with that high inherent body condition are fertile. So this is a very, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a very simple equation. 1 + 1, today's Monday, it's a school day, 1 + 1 = 2. Remember that, you can make cows fertile that way. Longevity, this is very important, and what I've found with a lot of the herds I'm working with around the world, because they've focused for so long on growth and muscle, they've lost longevity. They're calling 8-year-old cows old. This was never the case. I mean, an 8-year-old cow's in her prime. She's not old. And do you know how expensive it is to replace a female with a heifer that's been just a passenger all that time? Now suddenly she comes into the herd. In the dairy herds, the average Holstein cow in the US now is giving about 1.7 to 1.8 lactations, and then she's done. But it takes 2 lactations for a Holstein cow to cover the costs of what it costs to raise her as a heifer. They're underwater. And the only way to fix that is to moderate them, make them more functional, make them more fertile, make them more practical, not breed first for volume of milk, but for the practical components of what it takes to be a cow. And this lends itself very well to 2 different scenarios here. The sexual monomorphism, like the 2 Angus cattle at the top there. You see that Angus heifer's a little masculine, Angus bull's a little feminine. That's what happens when you breed primarily for growth and muscle, which are growth trait related instead of for reproduction, which is sex hormone related. Because the growth hormones, that's what starts when an animal when at conception, the growth hormones kick off and that animal keeps growing. When the long bones ossify and stop growing, up or out, that's when the sex hormones start. So the longer you keep them going taller or bigger boned, the more you delay the sex hormones from starting. And that's why these cattle are that sexual monomorphism, because you're breeding primarily for growth, getting them as big and as muscular as possible. Sexual dimorphism is the 2 pictures at the bottom. You see that bull and the female in both, they look nothing alike, absolutely nothing alike. I'm going to be out here in January with Kit Farrow for a day in Pretoria, and he's got a very good way of putting it. He says when 3 men are sitting together on a couch, their shoulders are touching. When 3 ladies are sitting together, their hips are touching. Mammals, we're not supposed to be the same size and shape, male and female, and we're not supposed to sound the same or look the same. The minute you start getting cows that are a little bit more masculine, they start sounding like bulls as well, when you hear them. So focusing on the sex hormones, focusing primarily on reproduction, and then avoiding negative outliers for all the other traits makes you a very, very functional, fertile cow. When you do the opposite, when you focus on the growth traits, the growth hormones instead of the sex hormones, you get an inverse. You get cattle that give you very good turnover, but not enough profit. The next slide will show us, here's a Chianina bull, which is like on the maximum size of growth, and then a miniature Galloway on the bottom side of growth. And when we run through these slides, I'm basically just trying to say the answer in all these traits is going to be somewhere around the middle. Average is good. Balance is really, really profitable. And I just long for the day that, and maybe the auctioneering companies like Karuush and these guys, maybe they do come around and say, hey, you must come to my bull sale. There's such good average bulls on that sale. They're the most average bulls you'll ever see. You must come and see these bulls. Because those are the profitable ones. The guys who promote top 1% for this and top 2% for that, that's not where the profit is. Yeah, they'll make headlines and you might actually get some turnover out of it. But long term, that's not where the profitability in those herds is. Muscle, same thing. The Belgian blue cattle on the left there, extremely heavy muscle, but totally dysfunctional. And then the Wagyu cow on the right, very slight of muscle and not really full bodied. So again, for most people in most areas, you want to be somewhere right in the middle of those two things. Milk, again, picking on the Belgian blue here, because I know there are no Belgian blues in Mpumalanga. But that female, she's not wet, but if she was in milk, she wouldn't have very much milk. You can see she's totally hormonally imbalanced and wouldn't have hardly any milk to feed her calf. And then the Holstein on the right, in a beef environment, would be a disaster, because her feed requirements to milk would be so high that she wouldn't actually give much milk on the veldt, and she would still have the requirements of a cow that does give a lot of milk, so she wouldn't fall pregnant, she'd fall prey to disease quite easily. So with milk, we need to be careful that we don't push our milk too high. We need to have milk somewhere around the middle as well. Too much milk can be a big detriment in a beef operation, because it takes calories away from fertility and takes calories away from fighting disease. Next, with carcass quality, marbling as well. For most people, most industries, in most places, for most pallets, somewhere between those two steaks is the eating experience that people want. With the Wagyu cattle that are extremely high marbling, yeah, if you want to eat 50 grams or 100 grams, it does make sense if you want to, sell your kids' university savings account to pay for it. But on the other hand, you also don't want a steak that you need a samurai sword to cut through in order to eat it. So it's somewhere between that is your balance. And what I found interesting with carcass quality is functionally efficient, moderate framed, balanced cattle have good carcasses. They just do. It's an incredible phenomenon that when you select for true reproduction and function, you get that with it. It's a very interesting concept. A question that I always get asked is what size a cow should be. And this is a thing I run through with a lot of my customers to try and get their cattle the right size, their cows the right size. And it's totally different from farm to farm, from area to area, because of different climates and rainfall and nutrition, etc. But I think the first thing is, from a nutrition standpoint, you don't want to spoil your cattle, because they also need to work for you, but you don't want to starve them. Where we were from in the Eastern Cape, there were a lot of sheep farmers who had cows, and they loved telling you at rugby or, in the pub, they would love telling you that, yeah, they do nothing for their cows. Their cows just look after themselves, and they don't even see their cows. And I was like, that's not a great way to take care of an asset. Like, what other industry doesn't take care of its assets? But then on the other hand, there are guys who also pour the feed out and give their cows the keys to the pantry, and that's also a disaster, because that, firstly, it's unaffordable, but the second thing is you can really mess up an animal's balance and endocrine system by pouring too much feed to it. Then the next thing is calving at the right age. Now, I'm assuming most of you would be calving at 3, right? Is that about right? So just making sure that those, by 39 months, whatever, that these heifers have calved for the first time, and make it a hard and fast rule, because if they can't get it done that first time, you're going to struggle with them after that. The next step is they must do that every year, annually, but the same time of year, not like January one year and December the next year. And that's where calving season is so important. I've seen it 90 days being a safe number. I've seen 65 days being a safe number. There's a big Hereford guy in North Dakota I work with who does 45 days. Anyway, whatever it is, just stick to it. Just keep that. These numbers aren't important. It's just the fact that there's a system that's important. and make sure they calve every year on time from the right age in that calving window. The next thing is to establish a cow-calf efficiency, and I'd say aim for somewhere between 45 and 55% of the mother's weight. If you go too much higher than that, again, then you start getting a cow that is putting too much into the calf and there's not enough calories for it to rebreed or to stay healthy or to have a long life. And under 45, then you've got a factory that's too big, that's not really putting out an efficient amount of product each year. What that does is it stops your cows from getting too big. The next one is to establish a minimum weaning weight that's acceptable for your area, for when you send your weaners off to the feedlot or to backgrounders or whoever, steer growers or whatever it is, that calf is, you'll know for your farm and your area what that number is, but don't let it go below that and keep that cow in the herd, because that stops your cows from getting too small. Because for most breeds in most places, too small is also a problem, because then you start competing with sheep and goats, and they whip us, because they can lamb 3 times in 2 years, and they give twins. They can raise a twin or a triplet. So we must stay in our lane. Like we want to, if we slip into the sheep and goat lane, then they're going to eat us. There are obvious differences with smaller properties, and there are breeds that are of a smaller nature that certainly do work, some dual-purpose breeds. So those are exceptions. I'm talking about the mainline middle industry. If you do all of that for 3, 4, even just 4 years, definitely by 5, then every cow on your property is the right size, if they stayed within that herd. If you're too scared you're going to lose all your cows, then just have a tagging system where the ones that keep doing that get a certain color tag, and that's what you get your bull mothers. They become your bull mothers. They're your nucleus herd that you keep heifers from, and the others are just your females that you sell calves for beef out of. Are there any questions at that point? I don't want to run away with anything. Okay, the next. Line breeding, these are just some examples of programs that have employed really, really good line breeding programs. Again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but the textbooks also warn us heavily against line breeding and inbreeding. I think that this might, I think I know why. They're not wrong because of the way they were measuring it. When you take something that's extremely high growth or high muscle or high milk and you line breed with that animal, it's going to cause subfertility and issues. Because remember, now you're propagating your growth hormones, not your sex hormones. But if you find an extremely well-balanced female that is not too much of anything but enough of everything, raises a good calf, does all those 6 or 7 things we spoke about before, is phenotypically balanced and adapted to your environment, and she's the type of cow you want to raise mothers out of, and now she's becoming a teenager, that's when I think you tear loose and allow that to become a cow that you're going to line breed with, where you can even get to the point where she eventually, in a pedigree, she's the great-grandmother all 4 times. And it won't affect fertility, because remember, she was fertile. Now you're compounding those fertility genes. So you're actually taking those positive sex hormones and you're compounding them to make them even better. The Europeans start screaming when I talk to them like this. They hate line breeding. Like anything under 12, over 12%, they start freaking out. And I know, I said to them, I think it was in Spain now, I said, I know why you guys don't like it. It's because you look at your royal families and then you think that your cattle are going to become like that. And it's not line breeding's fault with the royal families. They started with the wrong people. If they'd done it to the right people, they would have actually been fine. So, yes, sir.
So on the line breeding, we've tested a little bit on wildlife, and we have a bit more of a holistic farming enterprise. We've noticed that even if we select for sex hormones, that once you get to a certain point in the line breeding, you end up with animals that don't have that adaptability, that vigor. So, she might have, or they might have the best growth, the best sex hormones, the biggest testicle genetics, milk, whatever, but they can't display it because they never grow. They're always sick. As hulle voetjies seer het and they can't walk for 6 weeks, where other cattle can do it in 2. And again, we're focusing on the sex hormone here with the line breeding, but line breeding adaptability is now impossible because it's not a trait you can select for.
What species?
African buffalo, sable antelope. We've done it with. Yes. I'll come talk to you afterwards, but it's a very interesting story.
So you are right. You do lose vigor. Okay. And so you can lose heterosis and you can lose hybrid vigor. Now, what you don't lose is consistency. And I think that, I'm not saying go all the way and put full brother to full sister and do inbreeding. But I'm saying that remember, when you've got a grandmother 4 times in a pedigree as the great-grandmother, you've still got 4 other lines being represented in there. So there's still enough vigor with that consistency to take it through. I think one of the things we got told growing up was that hybrid vigor or basterkracht heterosis is a free lunch. But it's not a free lunch, because anyone who's crossed cattle knows that you cross 2 breeds that are unrelated and you get amazing growth and milk and vigor, and they fight disease and you get some longevity. But you get temperament and you suddenly get straight legs where you've never had straight legs, or a sheath pops out where you've never got a sheath. And then the inconsistency, like if we really are producers of a product and we want a product line, imagine if the next time you go get a Hilux, it's a totally different shape to the one before, and it's different size, and it goes a different speed. And I think we need to get back to the place where the product we put out into the market is stamped very similar to what it was before. Now, in your case, I'm assuming you seed stock producing in the wildlife, right? Okay. The biggest beneficiary of what you're doing is your customer. Because when they put that product on one of their animals, the prepotency is going to be unbelievable. And there's going to be heterosis. So you're going to pay a little bit of a price for that up front, but when they realize that you're guaranteeing them an actual product that's going to produce a certain way, and this I've seen around the world with programs that have line bred intensely like that, they'll give you a premium because they know what's inside that genetic code that's going to express itself when it comes out. But that's a fun discussion. The only thing that throws me off there is the horns. But from a reproduction side, yeah, that's very, very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so when selecting cattle, I'm a very strong propagator of that we need to look at our cattle and we need to analyze them phenotypically and select them phenotypically and use all the tools in the toolbox, but you don't forget the eye as well. So basically, we're looking for cattle that can eat, walk, reproduce. Okay, so strong muzzles and jaws, good feet and legs, good angle on the shoulder and the knee, good angle on, nice bend on the hind leg, good depth of heel and symmetrical toes. And then with reproduction, it's the sexual organs and the secondary sexual traits that they're all present and strong with that sexual dimorphism. And then the other stuff is stuff we've been talking about. So focusing on the 4 most important economic traits and then build on that foundation with those turnover traits. And then here's another thing that I do, and this is, I'm assuming there are a lot of different breeds represented here, right? Quality cattle do come in different shapes, sizes, and colors. And it is easy to make red ones and black ones and white ones and horned ones and polled ones and big ones and little ones. That's all very, very easy. The art of breeding lies in making good cattle. And what you've got to decide as producers is whether your good one fits your objectives, your resources, and your environment. And if they can fit into that, then you can do it with all different kinds of breeds. And like I said, type is much more important than breed. It really is. Breeds are a modern, this is a modern human construct. we've only been talking about breeds for just close on 200 years. If we go back, fat is, so whether we're going to refer to it as easy fleshing or softness or high inherent body condition, fat is so essential in livestock production because you need it for fertility, you need it for overwintering, you need it for calorie intake, and those surplus calories obviously go back into reproduction and milk and fighting disease, etc. And then you need it for carcass quality. We've got to have fat in our carcasses to create a good eating experience. But the other benefit that comes from the cattle that are earlier maturing, easier fleshing, is that they come into estrus earlier. Females come into estrus earlier. The bulls are fertile at a younger age. These cattle are non-selective grazers. The fat, early maturing cattle, easy fleshing, they've got appetite. They put their head down and they graze. The minute you get a leaner, later maturing animal, they become very much more selective on where they graze. And then they've got better temperaments. Your earlier maturing, easier fleshing cattle have better temperaments, and then that correlates again with fertility. There's a very good study that came out of Washington State University correlating fertility and temperament. And then, like I said, at the end of the day, when the animal's harvested, it's a way better eating experience. So the pros are way, way in favor of having these easier fleshing, earlier maturing, softer made cattle. Okay, just stick with me on this one. Forbes magazine prints a list. This is last year's list. It's not this year's, but it's the 10. Well, they rank all the countries in a happiness index from first to last, and it's based on, there's hundreds of different index points that they use for this. And what was interesting about this list, as you can see, it goes from Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Israel, Netherlands, Sweden, all the way down there. The one thing that's fascinating about this, and I think this is pure coincidence, but nice for the dairy farmers to run with, is that of those top 6 happiest countries in the world, 5 of them are in the top 6 for the most milk consuming countries in the world per capita as well. So I don't know if drinking milk makes you happy, but it's pretty interesting out of 235 countries that's the case. But what really jumps out to me at this, that all 10 of those countries are free market economies. Okay, so the population, the citizens decide the value of goods and products. The second thing is the way they treat energy as a resource. They free it up. Like they don't restrict energy at all. So whether it's coming as a traditional fossil fuel, or whether it's coming as renewable or hydro or nuclear, whatever energy it is, they free it up and use as much of it as possible. They don't hold it back. They don't demonize energy. And the last thing is they liberate women. And this is interesting because, as you can see, the countries that come to mind, you've already got 2 or 3 in your mind that haven't liberated women. They're not in that top 10. And the reason is, when you take half your population and you don't allow it to reach leadership, management, influential positions as the other half, you're trying to compete with only 50% of your population. And then you get that 50% to raise the 100% of the next generation. This just, morally it doesn't work, but it also doesn't work logically. So that's now, what do we do with that information? I think in our businesses, our livestock businesses, our farms, let's free up ideas, make it a marketplace of ideas so that everyone who's involved in that farm can bring something to the table. Don't hold back any energy. I mean, I know a lot of us, when I was young, had way too much energy, way too much. But channeling that energy and finding something to do with that energy instead of just stopping it seems to really benefit these big family businesses. And then the last thing is to liberate women. Like let the girls and the boys play, and give them those similar opportunities, because that maximizes opportunity. Yeah, so up until this point, guys, it's just all been about balance. So if we can move to the next slide, doesn't matter what type of animal or what concept or what idea it is just bringing it all back into balance. And the next slide is, do any of you speak Swedish? No one in Mpumalanga speaks Swedish. Yeah, okay. So they've got a word, the Swedes called lagom, and basically it's a philosophy that they live by, where the house they live in, the car they drive, the job they do, the food on their plate is just enough. They have enough of everything and they aspire to it. It's very different to, like where I live in Texas, it's big is best, like maximum house, maximum car, maximum food on the plate, job that pays maximum. And it's fascinating. Every time I go and work in these Scandinavian countries where they've got that lagom philosophy, remember that Forbes top 10 happiest countries? Those countries are all in the top 6 with that. So my idea here is we must do this with our livestock too. Is just enough of everything, not too much of anything, and you get that balanced animal out of it. Our next slide that we go to here is just to touch on what's going on from a macro scale in our industry. And the red meat industry around the world is booming. Like North America has never in history ever seen prices like it's seeing at the moment. Australia's swung back after their little dip after COVID. The European beef's so high. Argentina's exploding. And this is supply and demand. It's just that many more people in the middle class around the world who have tasted red meat and they like it. And they're not going to give it up now. They want it. I remember, this is going back 13 years now in Paraguay at the World Braford Congress. I was speaking there, but the one guy was speaking about how in Paraguay, at a family dinner, they budget 500 grams of beef per person, including women and children. Okay, so they take about 3 hours to eat supper, so they can do it. But that's a lot of beef. The Paraguay's eating like 65 kilos of beef per person per year. In China at that same time, they were eating 3 kilos of beef per person per year. Okay, I think I had that yesterday, like the whole day, from the thing. But what China's done since then is they've doubled that to 6 kilos, and it looks like they're going to up it again. And just that difference would have needed a cattle industry the size of Brazil to feed that difference, which you can't just make another Brazil. Brazil got 220 million cattle, which means that macro scale for red meat producers, and we're seeing this now in front of our eyes globally, the prices are going to keep, for most producers in most places, the price are going to keep inching up and up and up. And we'll get into a little bit of that again soon. The other thing I think we need to market well, and this is, sorry, can we go back one there? I'm sorry, Mafil, is with cattle, sheep, and goats, we're in a very sweet spot because we're in that humanely raised spot and very sustainable spot. We've managed to make these animals sustainable because we know how to produce them and reproduce them, but we've also, it's humane. We've got healthy, happy animals. They're outside almost their whole lives, or their whole lives over here, and they're not in confinement most of their lives. That's something that the other competing proteins can't say. For example, the chickens and pigs are extremely sustainable. They'll be around for as long as they're humans. They've adapted to live wherever they're humans, they're chickens and pigs. But the elite urban centers would call that inhumane. Now, I don't mind. I'm equal opportunity. I'll eat all that stuff. But the elite urban centers they're starting to frown on the way that chickens and pigs are raised. And then on the other side, we've got, well, there's a white-tailed deer, but let's call it a kudu or whatever, is extremely humane, but not that sustainable. We won't feed 8.5 billion people with kudu and wild-caught salmon. So we're in that very, very sweet spot in the middle. The next slide, some challenges. So you'll see those miniature Galloway and Highland calves, and this is a demand I get quite often from some of those Scandinavian countries because they subsidize their farmers per head, and they realize if they get a hold of miniature cattle, they can have more cattle, double or even triple the amount of cattle and get triple the subsidies. But what it creates is a false market. It actually takes away from the genuineness of the cattle market. Then on the right, those Belgian blues again. So this is an example of what happens in Belgium where their quotas, like let's say they say you can only have 18 cows on your farm. Human nature is going to make it the biggest possible 18 cows, and they go extreme on like the myostatin variations they've got. And then these cows can't calve naturally, so they have a C-section every single year. You can only have 3 C-sections, and they've got to terminate the cows. Again, it becomes a false industry. And that's where subsidies and quotas, I know often, I mean, every farmer in every country around the world, including myself, loves to complain about the government. But I'll tell you, one of the best things that you can have in a government is one that doesn't pay attention to you. The governments that don't know how much stock you've got and aren't subsidizing your stock and aren't subsidizing your dams and aren't subsidizing your buildings, or because the next thing they do is they quote to you after that. And they know how to quote to you because they've got your stock numbers. So when they say, well, you've got 400 cows, but you have to cut down by a quarter, then you've got to sell 100 cows. If they don't know what you've got and they don't care about you and they just let you do your thing, you're in a very, very positive position. Like, keep them far and they interfere with you as little as possible. Communism, this was a Brahmin bull in Cuba, and they sold him the day after I judged there for about 400, so about 8,000 rand. And I said to the guy, just how do you part with a bull like that for 8,000 rand? And he said, well, it's a left pocket, right pocket transaction. You know, it's going from one Castro account to the other. And this is the problem with communism, is that because there's no incentive to improve, the breeders just become reproducers. They're not really breeding cattle anymore. And there's a saying that second time in Cuba, this guy on the street told me, he said, we've got a deal with the government in Cuba where we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And and it's tragic, but that is the way that they operate. Socialism, this is the Pampas in Argentina, just an incredible place to raise cattle. And they, from about 2000 to 2008, when Christina Kirchner was president, they flirted hard with socialism, and she wanted to make beef really cheap for the people that voted for in Buenos Aires. So they banned 95% of exports. Now, all these farmers on the Pampas, they weren't going to produce cheap beef, so they turned that whole Pampas into soybeans for China. And Argentina went from 60 million cattle to 50 million cattle in those 8 years. They lost 10 million cattle. And what happened to the price of beef in Buenos Aires? It went higher than ever before. Yeah, social engineering is not good for people or livestock, and I think that's where that appeal of getting extra help, this is what happens. That same hook that pulls these farmers up the hill is the same one that pulls them down the hill. This is more for island countries. Like, there is an exception, you know, when you've got countries like Mauritius or Seychelles, smaller Caribbean islands, then overprotecting your farmers can actually be the only thing you can do. And the reason for that is whenever there's a food drought or there's a war or pandemic or whatever, then the ships stop going to those islands and they actually don't have any food. So everything I'm talking about today, there's exceptions, everything. Like, I'm not saying this is exact science for anything. And some of it, there might be big exceptions, but I think this is one exception you can carve out for that. This is an interesting example for me, and we're seeing this firsthand at the moment in the US. And so what happened was, there's very few sugarcane farmers in the US, okay? They're all in Louisiana and down into Florida. And they lobbied government to put big tariffs, this is going back now to the 50s and 60s and 70s, to put big tariffs on any sugar coming from the Caribbean and from Brazil so that they could be more competitive, okay? So government did that. In the 70s, government started subsidizing mealies, corn, okay? And they developed a byproduct out of corn called high fructose corn syrup. So now you've got a very cheap byproduct coming from corn competing with cane sugar, which is tariffed. So obviously, all the companies were going to use this byproduct. And that byproduct is running through all the people in America, and the pigs in America, and the chickens in America, and the dairy cows and the beef cows in America. And if you look at what Americans looked like and acted like before 1980 and after 1980, like just look at the country, what happened. I can't not draw a line between what happened with the government interfering with the source of sugar. Because remember, we talked about the endocrine system. Like an animal is what it eats. And whether you like it or not, we are also animals. Some of us are more animal than other guys, but we are. And this was government interfering with farmers through subsidies and quotas, and it actually created not just a health crisis in America, but a mental crisis as well. This next slide, it's a typical Texas cattle scene where you've got your oil pump, your nodding donkey, and you've got your cows all around it. And a lot of these guys, when you ask them their carrying capacity, will tell you they can run about 100 cows to an oil pump, is how they do it. There's a downside to this, though, because what's happened with this value chain, the way I see it, and some guys don't agree with me on this, but just go with me, is that largely that Texas, and this is going to apply to South Africa too. I'm guessing most of you guys make money out of your cattle, and it's not a secondary job, right? Okay, so it's not like some of the guys at groups I talk to, there might be 10% who actually live off their farms, and you guys are far enough out of Gauteng that it's not like that. But so the oil industry subsidizes their cattle industry. Okay, they don't like hearing it, but that's the truth. Okay? Oil industry subsidizes the cattle industry. Then the cow-calf guys get told by the feedlotters what kind of cattle, now it's starting to come close to home. The feedlotters tell the cow-calf guys what kind of an animal they want to feed in the feedlot. Then the cow-calf guys produce that animal for the feedlot, which isn't profitable for them, but is profitable for the feedlot. So then they become a charity that's subsidizing the feedlot. Okay. Then the feedlot is feeding these cattle, and the abattoirs, the processors, the packers, they tell the feedlots, listen, this is how much fat we want on a carcass. So it's not just a 150-day feed anymore for them. Now they need to feed them for 180 days, and that last 30 days is just fat. Okay. So they were making money to about 150 days, the feedlots, and then that last 30 days, now they start going under profit for it, because that's what the packers want. So then now the feedlots are subsidizing the packers. And then the packers have done a remarkable thing, which is different to here, where the supermarkets there make 1% profit on beef. Okay, so if you buy a steak for $16, they make 16 cents. So it's just an anchor to get people in the door, because the packers convince them they can do that, and they make money off toothpaste and toilet paper and stuff like that. So of the 100% available in the value chain, 100% of profit available in the value chain, the cow-calf guys are making about 3%, the backgrounders, the stockers are making about 3%, the feedlots are making about 3%, the retailers are making about 1%, and the packers, processors, are making 87% of that available profit, and they only have the cattle for about 2 days, less than 2 days. Okay. My argument with this is charity begins at home. And we don't have to be a charity organization as a farm. Let's produce cattle that make money for us, and I promise you the feedlots will make a plan, and I promise you the packers will be fine, and the retailers are good at selling toothpaste and toilet paper. Because up until now, we've been doing everything that the next link in the chain wants us to do. So the argument against that is, well, the customer's always right. But is the customer always right? I don't know. I mean, is it? Like in India, there's a big industry on the streets of India, a little bit like Joburg, not totally different, but India's just another level, where if you're begging on the side of the street, okay, so you're producing the product, you're the beggar, and the client is the Indian businessman or housewife driving past, and they're going to give you money for begging, okay? Free market trade. The premium product on that is if you're holding a child. If you're holding a child, you get more from the businessman or from the housewife. The elite product is if that child is a little bit maimed or blinded or like can't walk properly, okay? Then they get even more money for that. That is what the customer, with their money, is showing they want. They want a child, they'll give the most money for that. So now you've got organizations in India, criminal organizations, human traffickers, who will take kids off the street, maim them, and hold them at street sections so that they can get a premium product in it. What has this got to do with cattle? I don't think we must handicap our cow herds because the customer thinks they're right. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, the customer isn't always right. Sometimes charity needs to begin at home. So another challenge, wars and unrest. This is somewhere I'm going soon. I don't know how excited I am. This is South Sudan. It's a Dinka herdsman with his Dinka cows. Wars and unrest make it very difficult to be profitable or even productive in the cattle industry. Sudan, just north of there, I mean, they've been in civil war since the 80s. I'm going there too next month, which is also interesting. But the issue here is you can upset an entire market system, geopolitical market system, through these wars and famine. And this is why, like, voting for peace and paying for peace and just making peace the priority is good for everyone, you know, for obviously for the people not being destroyed, but the entire market responds better when there's peacetime. And you see these are very similar to, not the Mpumalanga farmers, but very similar to the Free State farmers. They like their cows and their guns, but they're different body type to the Free State farmers. I think the Free State farmers need to keep their shirts on. They mustn't. So the Texas ones are the same. Okay, so this value chain, this is what I saw happening a lot. Are there any Wagyu breeders here? I do quite a lot with some Wagyu guys. But anyway, I saw this happening a lot. Is a Wagyu breeder would go to a steakhouse in a big city and really have a great eating experience. Now they want to be in the Wagyu business. So then they buy embryos or semen or some expensive cattle, and they breed them, and the calf is born, and then now what? They don't know what to do next. And I think what we've done in the cattle industry is we've built the value chain from the wrong side. We've assumed that the seed stock producer, the stud breeder, is the first link in the chain, and then we build it out, you know, to cow-calf, backgrounder, feedlot, abattoirs or slaughterhouses, logistics, wholesaler, retailer, and then consumer. But that's pushing a chain. You can't push a chain. You've got to pull a chain. And I think when we build these beef schemes, working on a Wagyu one now in Montana, you've got to start with a customer and pull the chain to where the stud breeder is not the main, like the star of the show or the ringleader, but actually the clown at the end of the parade that gets pulled forward like this. And the most successful beef brands I've seen around the world are the ones that get pulled in that direction. And it's just fascinating because even today, there's someone in South Africa who's gone and bought a breed because of a reason like that, and their calf's going to be born now in the spring, and they're not going to know what to do with that calf. So I think predestination is very, I don't believe in predestination for people, but I think for cattle, when that calf hits the ground, you've got to know where it's going to end up. Otherwise, you can be caught between a rock and a hard place. Another challenge and opportunity, let's start on the right with that show steer. This is a big industry in the US is show steers. It's a sport for the kids. And like in Houston, Fort Worth, San Antonio, this is just in Texas, there'll be about 2,000 to 2,500 of these steers on the show. The champion steer ends up selling for somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million. And it's big, big business. Now, I do think that shows are important, personally. I think every product needs a show. I think boats, vacuum cleaners, washing machines all need shows. But what we've done is a lot of these shows have become irrelevant in the industry. I mean, that is not a industry relevant steer, it's a poodle. And if we can somehow manage to present our cattle to the public, but with the industry relevant, industry appropriate, practical mindset of breeding for functionality and all the traits we've been talking about, then I think there is a value in exhibiting animals. Anyways, that is neither here nor there. You don't look like a bunch of show people, so I'm not going to hang on that. The other slide is probably closer to home, and that's dealing with EPDs or genomics. Now, what I share with one of your own here in Mpumalanga, Bucky Ace, I agree with him 100% on how we read this, is that let's say we're going to use EBVs, EPDs, or genomics as a tool, then I think we need to be breeding using those numbers for fertility. Okay, so remember what the two fertility traits is: high inherent body condition, so that would be the fat number, back fat number, and the second one would be hormonal balance, so that number would be scrotal circumference at a year. So breed for that, make sure that they on the positive, and then breed against the negative outliers of every other trait. So don't breed for high weaning weight, breed against low weaning weight. Don't breed for high milk, breed against low milk. Don't breed for maximum muscle, breed against no muscle. And then you end up with an average animal that's very fertile, that's got enough of that, but not enough of, enough of everything, not enough, can we go back one? Sorry. I just want to go through that graph with you and explain why I just said that. That's Dorian Garrick, he's a New Zealand geneticist, and we were in Kazakhstan and he put that graph up. And I don't usually look at graphs because it's like when I open the bonnet of a car, I don't really know what's going on. But this fascinated me. So he did a study with Angus steers in America. Look, Angus in America is like Bonsmara in South Africa. It's very dominant numerically and very popular. And using a dollar beef index, which was a composite index for growth and muscle, from 1980 to 2017, they'd made an Angus steer $144 more profitable, okay, than it was. And that's taking into consideration inflation, feed costs, labor costs, everything like that. Now, from 2017 to now, that's gone to about $160, okay? That's a big win. It works. That index worked. It made the steers $160 more profitable. During that same time, the average Angus cow in America cost $136 more per year to run. That 136 now is about 180, okay? So that means that if you are a cow-calf producer and you're not feeding out your own steers, so you sell your steers or your weaners for someone else to feed out, you are losing $180 a year so that someone else can make $170 a year. And that's when the penny dropped, that we've got to look at these numbers differently. Because all that does is make the processors and the packers rich, and it makes the farmers poorer. And remember, we have to have farmers on the land for all the reasons we gave earlier. So, I think if you're going to use EBVs, if you're going to use EPDs and genomics, it's the way we use it. It is a Rolls Royce if you use it properly. It really is. It's very well designed. If everyone is measuring everything honestly, accurately, all the time in large numbers in the same environment, it is. It's a very, very good engine. But this Rolls Royce has got a driver that often doesn't have a license. And that's not good to have a Rolls Royce with a driver that doesn't have a license. They don't know how to drive this thing. Or the drivers had too many black rats. Do you know what a black rat is? Rum and Coke. That drivers had too many black rats. So the drivers that are drinking the black rats are the sales and marketing guys, not Karoo Ush, other guys. who come to you and say, oh, this bull's like number 1 for this, and it won that, and it's like top 10% for that. That's too many black rats. And the driver without a license are the guys in breed societies, in air-conditioned offices, with white shirts on, that can tell you on the phone what bull and cow you should be breeding based on their data, but have never got their boots dirty. And I think that if we're going to use this Rolls Royce, stay off the black rats and make sure the guys have got licenses. The next slide is just going to make the same point in a different way. This bull, in the biggest database of cattle in the world, okay, is the number 1 bull for dollar profit. That's the total index. He's the number 1 bull for dollar ranch, which is the cow-calf felt index. He's in the top 0.01% for dollar feeder. So he's like right at the top, probably like top 10 for dollar feeder, which is for feedlot index. So if he was a person, he'd win the Olympic marathon. Then the next week he'd win the sumo wrestling. And then a week later he'd win the world chess competition. It's impossible. And then look at him. Hands up who would use this bull on their milk cows. No one. And this is the problem. This is the best bull in the world, okay, according to that. And my argument is we have to go beyond just reading about our cattle, and we need to start looking at them again. The next slide, this is, I think we're in good company here, but this is just a map showing all the deaths from GMO consumption over the last 30 years by country. And that's a color map, not a black and white, not a black and white map. We've demonized a lot of these sciences and technologies to the point where it's almost like a curse word to talk about them. And yet, and I'm saying this within reason, you know, within balance. But the billions of Chinese people brought out of poverty through yellow rice, the amount of mealies flown with USAID jets, with jet fuel that are GMO to Sudan, to Ethiopia, to Niger, to feed people in famine, is incredible, and it's all because they were GMO crops. Now, we don't hear about people dying of hunger in large amounts unless there's a war anymore. It's not, no one dies in famines anymore. Now it's the other problem. They're eating too much. And this is where I don't think we should demonize these. And the next slide is the same. You know, our job is to produce food. Fossil fuels is the food of food. And without oil, gas, and coal, it's very difficult for large-scale farming operations to make food. And yet, that's been demonized instead of us being grateful that this technology came along. You know, 200 years ago, everyone was poor. Everyone. The only rich people were the royalty and a few aristocrats. There was no weekends. There was no holidays. There was no comfort. You worked until you couldn't anymore, and then you slept, and then you worked some more. This is what changed things. And for some reason today, we've been told to demonize it. The next slide, so Manhattan in New York, Big Apple, and then Manhattan in Kansas is big cattle country, very different places. This is not different to here. Let's say that's Cape Town, and let's say that's Pickup Place, Standerton. And the people in the big cities have got such a problem with the way in which we finish these cattle off in the feedlot, because we're keeping them in confinement. They're not grazing on green grass. There's no butterflies flying and birds singing and flowers on the ground, and they're not drinking out of streams. They're not under the shade of trees. You know, they're under shade cloth, and they're drinking out of troughs. And they've got people who walk through them every day chasing them up to see whether they're healthy or not. And they just don't think this is good practice. These people are all living in a confined space. None of them are hunting for deer or trying to catch fish, or none of them are picking nuts and berries. to eat. They're all getting their total mixed ration from the pizza store on the side of the street. They've got doctors and pulmonologists and gynecologists, and they've got dentists and all pediatricians, all these people chasing them up and down every day to see if they're still well or not. And yet the people who choose to be in that human feedlot by choice don't want us to raise cattle in that kind of environment. Very ironic. My grandfather, he was quite strong on this. He always said that when I'm with a group of people where I don't know them very well, we must never talk too much about religion or politics or sex. And we won't talk about sex today because it's actually quite boring, but we're going to talk about a little bit about religion and politics and how it affects livestock. You know, the top left there, that's like a typical South African farmhouse in some areas where we've had to rely on serious security because of failure of law and order politically within the country. And yet, we've somehow become the most developed security industry in the world. Like, some of the technology that we've developed through that has been incredible. So that one challenge has become somewhat of an opportunity, and I think an opportunity that there's opportunity to sell that to the rest of the world, the places I've been to. Top right, that's India. That's the biggest cattle country in the world with 320 million head. But the majority of Indians are Hindu, and their culture and religion doesn't allow them to slaughter cattle. So a lot of the surplus cattle that aren't being milked are just on the street. They're just in the streets eating food that could be for the 1.3 billion people that are in India. That's a problem, because now they're creating a human issue, because now cattle are eating human food. That's a challenge. The opportunity, though, is that as sacred as cows are in India, the rupee is probably more sacred than the cows. So they found an illegal trade into Bangladesh, which is the biggest cattle export annually in the world, accepted, but illegal, but not monitored. And they get rid of a lot of surplus cattle through that way. So wherever there are challenges, there seem to be opportunities. That big ship at the bottom left, that's a ship out of Brazil. There are lots of these from Brazil and Uruguay that take cattle to the Middle East. Some of them take up to 25,000 cattle on a boat. Now, the Middle East, during Eid and Ramadan, they need a lot of cattle for sacrificial purposes. They don't have enough land or enough grazing, enough resources to actually feed their own cattle and sheep for this, so they bring them in from Brazil. Challenge, opportunity met with ingenuity from the South Americans. This is going to be a big opportunity for Africa too. They're already starting to flirt hard in Tanzania and in Kenya, and it's going to come all the way south. Another two big challenges that we found, which I think we're overcoming quite well, the one is the cell-grown, the lab-grown beef, where they develop cell lines, and then they grow this protein in labs, and then they serve it as a protein. It's a beef protein. Its DNA is the same as what we would be producing ourselves. The biggest issue they've got is two things. The one is it's too expensive, and the other one is it's ironic, but their biggest opposition is AI, not artificial insemination, artificial intelligence, because the amount of power that those labs would take off the grid, all that beef. Like, think of how big these labs must be to grow all this beef to replace the beef that we produce. It was implausible to start, but now with AI coming in that also needs all that power, AI is higher up in the hierarchy, so that's going to slip away. And the other beef is the Impossible Burger. That's the burger made from non-beef or non-meat products, vegetable burger. Have you guys had that before? Not. I had it. It's not great. But it's the most, they did the trifecta. It's the most incredible food product ever produced, because it did three things that no other product has done. The first thing is it's expensive. The second thing is it doesn't taste good. And the third thing is it's not good for you. So no food product has ever hit all three of those things. So this came in strong in the US. Every single fast food chain was serving this, but now you hardly see it anymore. The other thing is, if we can just go back to that, a vegan, I've got vegetarian and vegan friends, which is, it's fine, as long as they don't challenge you on the ethics of eating meat. Because vegans and vegetarians, the pampas that I showed you earlier, that all the cattle on, when they plowed that up and planted soybeans, they killed everything. They killed the worms and the moles and the rats and the rabbits, and they killed the deer, and they killed the foxes, and they killed the birds, everything. A vegan diet kills a lot of animals. They're savages, those vegans are too. So, next. This is more for context, and I think a lot of our conversations never ever actually get far enough in that they assume you in a tribe, and then they stigmatize you according to whatever tribe you're in. And I think we have to have context around these conversations. So, if you've got cows, you're anti the environment, or if you've got a tractor, you're anti-climate, and all that kind of stuff. And there's never any context given to it. And it's like if you ask me if I played sport at school and university, and I said yes, it means nothing. It could be carpet bowls, or it could be UFC. You don't know until you actually talk about it. And I think with these contextual things, we can, in context, we can argue that more cows are better for the planet than less cows. We can argue that more fossil fuels are better for the planet than less. They're very, very good arguments for all of this. And yet, I think that what we do is we never allow the conversation to get into context. The other thing is humans become demonized just by the fact that we exist. It's like a primary sin, the fact that we even exist. And it's not us and the environment. We're part of the environment. And we're the only part of the environment that cares about everything else in the environment. I know we do a lot of things badly, but especially farmers, and especially farmers that own and operate their own land, are by far the best environmentalists in the world. So if you drive from Cape Town to Bight Bridge, all along the road on the farms, there's minimal erosion, there's maximum grass cover, there's wildlife. It's amazing how much wildlife you see driving around South Africa, because they own the land and it's theirs. Now drive from Bight Bridge to Cairo, and there's erosion, the trees are chopped down for firewood, the animals are why? Because they don't own that land. It's not theirs, and this is where context needs to come into a lot of these conversations. The next, this is just a map of where the grasslands around the world is. So you can see the veld and savanna in Africa, the downs in Australia, the steppes in Europe and Asia, pampas in South America, and the prairies in North America. All the same thing. It's just native grassland, veld. 45% of the world's land, and really, there's only three things you can do with it. The one is you can leave it to rot, grow it and rot it, which, believe it or not, large swaths of the US, there's like Ted Turner who owns CNN doing stuff like that, which is just insane because it's a waste, firstly, and secondly, all the gases that get emitted by rotting grass. You can grow it and then burn it, which is also crazy because if you're not going to be, turning it into a protein, and then there's carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. And then the third thing is you can graze it responsibly. It's better for the soil if done properly. It's better for the environment and the climate in the end. And you get a very good, nutritious product that's affordable, that's reliable, and that's plentiful from that. So it's an obvious that the third choice is the best. Or you could build golf courses. You know that if you put all the golf courses in the world together in one place, it would be the size of Belgium. Do you know how boring that would be? It'd be like even more boring than sex. That would be an incredibly boring place to live with all those golf courses. So And we are very good at a lot of things, but the one thing we haven't been so good at in agriculture is succession planning and estate planning. And I just think that, I suppose we're starting to get better, but we really need to get to a point where we move beyond the first child born in the family with a willy gets the farm. And then the second child without a willy gets an insurance policy, and then the children after that just have to make a plan. I think it's archaic, and this is one part of our industry I think we just have to do better with. And if we can move to the next slide, there's so many resources available to this. I mean, I'm not an expert at this at all. I've just noticed worldwide this is something that farmers and ranchers don't do very well. That next slide is going to show us, these are just an overview of cattle numbers around the world. So the number one cattle country in the world is 308 million, India, Brazil 194, then China 102, America with 89, and Ethiopia with 70 million, okay? Why I'm giving you those numbers is the US is still the number one beef producer in the world, in spite of it only being fourth. And this goes back to efficiency, you know, getting cattle to breed early. I'd say 80% of the cows in the US calve at 2 years old for the first time. The efficiency of the feedlot systems, the way in which those processes work, those carcasses. So efficiency comes into it even more so than numbers. What is interesting, that 60% of the world's cattle are in those 5 countries. So that's pretty consolidated and centralized. I mean, I don't know if that's particularly a good thing, but it is what it is. And then the stat I like is that every single country and territory in the world either eats beef, drinks milk, has cattle, and almost all of them do all 3 of that. This is a very global business we're in. It's not a niche market at all. Like, this is a truly, truly global business. This next slide, I'm going to go back to EBVs and EPDs and stuff now. You know, there's so many tools available in our toolbox. We've got pedigrees and phenotype and raw data and EBVs and genomics. We've got all these tools. Maybe the mistake we've made is, let me use this table for example. This is an incredibly well-made functional table. Look, Michiel's leaning on it. It's got a laptop. It can put all the stuff on it. It's got very strong legs. It's appealing phenotypically. It's got nice wood, varnished wood on it. Now, if that was a cow, what a lot of guys would be doing is they'd have their back to the cow and they'd be going, it's +2 for milk, it's +5 for wean, it's this for growth. We need to focus on the product, not just the tools that make the product. And if the tools that make the product are worthwhile tools, then the product will be good. Do you notice I didn't mention the screwdriver and the saw and the hammer and the chisel that made that table? Like, we have to focus on the product more than just the tools that make that product. You know? Okay, so let's go back to this. We need cattle that can eat, walk, and reproduce. Okay, so that little, the way the cloth dips in there makes that bull look a little strange, but that's a bull with good testicles, good feet and legs, really good strong head and jaw. Now you'll see the bull on the right with these small testicles, very straight in his hind leg, very straight in his shoulder, no cushion in his pasterns. That bull's not going to do any of that very well, okay? The next slide is going to show us udder quality. So what I maintain is there's never been a cow in the history of the world with there's never been a good cow with a bad udder, okay? So we've got to keep these udders attached above the hocks, that ligament attachment. We need good fore-udder attachment, nice teat size and placement, good definition of quarter, and from behind we want height and width in those rear udders. Remember, a dairy cow, even these ones that produce 50, 60 liters, their udders are tucked above the hocks. So you don't need depth of udder for volume of milk. That you see the cow on the right with the collapsed udder floor and the poor ligaments, no forward attachment. There's no longevity in a cow like that. There's no health in that cow's udder. The calf's really going to struggle. That cow's not going to be in any serious herd for any length of time at all. The next slide is going to show us head quality, and this is so important, and I think South Africa is probably a leader in selecting cattle based on their skull shape and their head shape. because it really does tell the story of what's coming behind the head is shown in the head. Like that bull on the left, you can see by the length of his head, the width between the eyes, the fact that his eyes are sunken with eyebrows over them, big jaw, wide muzzle, nice pole on him. You just know that bull is going to be big-bodied, he's going to have width, he's going to be easy fleshing, he's going to be kind, he's got a nice kind eye on him. So there's fertility traits built into him. And then the bull on the right, more narrow in his muzzle, more tighter in his throat, high eye. These cattle with a very small high eye, same as a horse. Crazy, okay? You drop that eye down and put a nice kind eye under an eye bank, you start getting the masculinity traits and you get some temperament traits out of that too. And as you can see, that the bull on the right's body follows exactly what that head did. And you see also he's got that tight throat. And we need some skin on our cattle for that fleshing ability and adaptability. Next slide. Feet, that bull in the top left. Cattle need big feet, guys, because that's your foundation to carry a big body. And you need toes that are evenly sized with symmetry to them, depth in their heels. That bull's got really nice feet. You see that Brangus bull with well-suspended testicles and a clean enough sheath. And then the Hereford bull on the right, this is what tropical degeneration looks like. That bull's in Alabama, and because of the heat, his scrotal neck gets so long to try and regulate the thermal regulation of the testicles that eventually he's dysfunctional because of that. So that's what happens with degeneration in the tropics. Now, you can do that with cattle by feeding them too. If you feed bulls too much, they have to lengthen their scrotal neck because their body temperature is too warm, especially with the fat on their scrotal neck and the fat around their testicles, that they lengthen that scrotal neck in order to get thermoregulation on their testicles. So it's very important. I'm equal opportunity. I believe in equity. The udders must be above the hocks, testicles above the hocks. Next slide. Just feminine wedge shapes and analyzing bodies on these cattle. You see the Wagyu cow is deeper in her chest, tighter in her flank. Shows us her hormonal balance is slightly off, where that Angus female just gets progressively deeper and more powerful as you go back into her flank, hip, and hindquarter. That just shows a very fertile feminine phenotype. Next slide, maternal and terminal body types. The Hereford bull on the left, more rumen function, more internal dimension, more fat cover over the ribs, better testicle size and suspension and shape. That's a bull that will produce very good daughters. The bull on the right, the Blondie Aquitaine, you see he's more cylindrical through his center body. He's free of flesh, almost no fat on that bull. He's got a over-pronounced muscle shape, probably expressing one of the myostatin genes. And that's a bull that would be more utilized in the Europe-type terminal program where all these calves get terminated for beef. The next slide, guys, temperament is not just a convenience trait, it's an economic trait. And around the world, with labor becoming tougher, farmers becoming older, we've got to get rid of the crazy cows. There's no excuse for having wild cattle on your farm. We chatted about color earlier, and there's some examples. You know, that silver color works really nice at low altitude of the coast. Red's really good in the veldt and savannas because it can reflect infrared and absorb enough ultraviolet. And black's very good in very cold areas. If the average temperature is 15 degrees or less, or you're at high altitude, black can work as a very good color as well for absorbing the ultraviolet and actually utilizing that energy. Hair coats in summer and winter. So what makes cattle shed hair and grow hair is light. So the amount of light in a day, as the days start getting longer, then the cattle start shedding their hair, and that light hits the pituitary gland behind the skull, and you'll see your heifers that shed off first, the ones that become slick first, they become the ones that come into estrus first. They're always your most fertile cattle. And in winter, the two things that make cattle winter the best is fat and hair. So if you've got easy fleshing cattle that can put that fat on through the winter, and they can grow some hair as well, because the hair grows as the days start getting shorter, that can help them to overwinter well as well. Next up is pigmentation. Anyone who's got cattle with white faces or white on them, you'll see the bull on the left has got pigment around the eyes and on the testicles. That can be very, very important for several things. The first thing is just from a stress level, especially with ultraviolet, but also with infrared. An animal with pink eyes or no pigment around the eyes, that stress will make them tear up. And I see this a lot in Holstein herds and the dairy herds that I visit. The ones without pigment are always like a little stressed and teary, and eventually that tear becomes like a magnifying glass, and that ultraviolet goes through the magnifying glass and starts actually creating sores on that animal's eyes. Testicles for sunburn, sunburned udders and testicles, that can really affect an animal's productivity. And then with feet, a dark hoof is always better than a light hoof, simply because light hoofs grow faster than dark hoofs. So it's much easier to keep your feet intact when they're a little bit darker. If we can go one back again, the other thing with white on cattle is with photosensitivity. If an animal eats a poisonous plant, what's your most prominent plant? Gansqueek, Dilp. If they eat that and they've got no pigment, they can die quickly because of that photosensitivity. If you don't get them in the shade immediately, all those white spots end up peeling off and the pink spots. So pigmentation in cattle is very, very important. Next slide. And it all correlates, guys. Like body parts work together and they fit together. Like if you see a very masculine neck and crest on a female, almost always she's got a small vulva. You know, if you've got a bull that scans with very high marbling, almost always he's subfertile, because testosterone burns fat. Okay? So these things all correlate together, and I think it's our job to just learn to observe these things. And then it's balance, and I really mean this. Average is where the money is. No matter what breed or type of animal, or even what management practice you use, it's about balance and avoiding the extreme dogmas also, like these little religious cults that happen around each different way of farming or each breed. I go to all of them, so sometimes I come away from some of those conventions feeling like I need to go confess sins or have a shower or something, because you feel so dirty that you once gave antibiotic to a calf, or you did something like crazy, like not move cattle for a month. I don't know. We just need to keep all of this stuff in balance. Next slide. Yeah, so if anyone wants to tell me that my talk was very average, then they can send me an email. If you've got complaints, Michiel, he'll take all the complaints. Okay. Anyway, I'd love to chat to you guys about anything, and I promise you I enjoy people not agreeing with me, because I usually come out learning something. So please don't, not that I would expect you to be hesitant, but please don't hesitate. And now if there's any questions, can we have the next slide there? Yeah, if there are any questions, Michiel and I know everything. Whatever I don't know, he knows. So he'll answer the ones we don't know. Okay.
Is there any way of determining prepotency before doing the test and seeing the part?
So that's a great question, and I think that's where using the toolbox is important. So prepotency is very difficult when there's maximum heterosis. Okay. Now, the way to get it done, and I'm going to use race horses or horses as an example. Okay. If you've got a sprinter and a long distance endurance horse, but your objective is to make middle distance horses. Okay. If you breed a sprinter to a long distance horse to make a middle distance horse, you're going to have no prepotency, because you're shotgun breeding. You're breeding fire with ice. So what you're going to end up with is some that sprint some that are long distance, and a few in the middle. So with prepotency, you actually need to understand the pedigree as much as the animal itself. And I always say, if you want to breed middle distance horses, then all the stallions you use need to be middle distance horses. So if some of your mares are sprinters, you breed them to a middle distance horse. If some are endurance horses, you breed them to a middle distance horse. And the more you stack type on type on type on type, you get that prepotency. That's why I am a prepotent of line breeding within reason, or breeding like to like to like, and not breeding. Corrective mating for me is very dangerous. Like if you've got a very sickle hock bull, the last thing you do well, sickle hock cow, the last thing you do is breed it to a straight hock bull. You know, you find that optimum and you keep breeding towards it, and then you'll get the prepotency. Now, from a sire, for a sire to be prepotent, he needs hormonal balance. So he's got to have the masculinity, he's got to have muscle expression, he's got to have that sire's head with some punch and some thump in him. And for a female to be prepotent from her side, she needs to be the same. And I want to touch on that female, if you don't mind, if I can touch on the females a bit. Up until recently, we've always thought that the cow and the bull give 50% each to the progeny. But we're starting to learn more and more how much more influence the cow has than the bull on what the progeny becomes. So 50% of the nuclear DNA comes from the bull and 50% from the cow. Okay, that's how we've bred forever, and that's how we've developed EBVs and then genomically enhanced them, etc. But mitochondrial DNA, 100% of it comes from the cow. Okay, so that makes that female a little bit more important in that equation of the next generation. Then within the womb, during fetal programming, the environment created in the womb is 100% the cow. So like her nutritional status, her stress levels, whatever. Genes get turned on and off in the womb from there. So they're conceived with their DNA code, and then those genes turn on and off in the womb depending on the environment of the womb. That's all the cow. All of that is the cow. Okay. And then the first 48 days, 48 hours of birth, that colostrum that cow gives to the calf, that paves the way for how that calf's going to produce, how vital it's going to be and how it's going to flourish for the rest of its life. That's all the cow. And then that cow's got 7 or 8 months, well, however long it is, you keep your calves on their mothers, to be educated on how to be a cow, with hierarchies, how to graze, when to lie down, when to drink, that's all the cow. So then it becomes, I don't know, 65, 70% the cow. And then when you think back to all your herds, you've got those cows that give you a good calf every year, no matter what bull you use to them. And then you realize that. So we've always spoken about prepotency coming from the bull, but those cow families are actually where the guarantee comes in on it. Does that somehow make sense? I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm not very fluent in English. I will try. I only become fluent in English when the speed cop stops me. Temperament in cattle. Well, in our country, we've very problems with stock theft. We're farming with boran cattle, and they have temperament. And I don't think we must ignore that. I like the temperament of a boran cattle because they're very suspicious to strange people. They have a feeling when things is not right, they're moving. That's why I like temperating.
I also like boran cattle. And I like their temperament. Like with temperament, I'm talking about like a Nello that hits you with her head and her feet at the same time. You know, one that you can't keep inside a pen or can't even get within 100 meters on a horse. Like that's what I'm talking about. Or the cows that try and kill you when you get into the crawl. But I think a Borano, intelligent cattle, you know, like I've worked a lot with those cattle, and I don't think there's a temperament issue. You just have to understand their herding instinct. Just don't put one on its own. Yeah. Yes.
Which I just would like to have your view on age for first calf. Okay, I've heard you asking the question, and South Africa probably is, if you're lucky, 3 years, you know, for most of the breeds. You say in America it's 2 years. Are we not doing a disfavor to the female and the, you know, the ability to reproduce, to keep females, you know, away from the bull for too long if they are able to actually breed at 2 years?
Well, I think you answered the question in the question. And I do agree with it. I think the natural cycle is to not withhold a female from the bull when she's in estrus. Now, I also understand that this isn't an overnight fix. Okay, so let me take one step back. In our area, the Stormberg in the Eastern Cape, my dad's generation on the Winterberg side, which is south of us, but that's quite cold and high altitude, those farmers had calves every 2 years by choice. The cows calved every 2 years because you can't calve a cow every year there. That's what they said. Okay, their sons, our age, are laughing at them because they thought like that. Okay, I do think that the next generation, or soon enough, we are going to be forced to start breeding our females earlier so that they are calving younger. And what I found in the herds, the big herds I work at, where they have 45-day breeding seasons and they calve from 2 onwards, is you get a cow that is extremely good in terms of her hormonal balance. She's smaller in her joints. She's much more relaxed in her skeleton. She fleshes easier because she hasn't had that extra muscle built into her from a year of not producing. Her udder's got a lot more integrity because it's had no fat deposits in it. Her sexual organs are free of fat. They're smaller cows, but they're more efficient factories, and they actually last longer. The Europeans who've got, like Denmark and I'd say the Scottish borders, probably the easiest place in the world to run cattle. And their cows are about 800 kilos when they calve for the first time at 3. Okay? And the reason they say it is because if you lose a year on the front end, but you gain 2 on the back end. Okay? But that's like a bumper sticker. There's no research that went into that. Okay, now the flip side of that coin is if all of us here started calving at 2 next year, we're going to run out of cows. Okay, but there's a herd in Uberaba in Brazil, a Nelore herd, and I just started talking about the Nelore. Okay, they are the wildest, biggest, latest maturing, craziest cows you've ever seen. So if you can do this with them, you can do it with anything. Okay, so the herd is called Navirai, and they sell about 600 Nelore bulls a year. About 30 years ago, at 8 months old, they started taking semen from all their bulls at 8 months old. Not to freeze it, just to look under the microscope if there was live sperm. The bulls with live sperm became candidates to be stud bulls. Okay? And they started exposing all their heifers to calve from 2 years old. The first year they got 6% conception on their heifer calves. But those 6% became their bull mothers. So now they were breeding heifers that calved at 2 with bulls that had live sperm at 8 months old. And they said it took 10 years for them to actually make that a norm in their herd, but they kept doing it. They didn't get rid of the cows that didn't. Those cows just didn't get a tag. That certain tag. So eventually their nucleus herd became the earlier breeders. They said the one thing though is they lost a lot of market share in the beginning because their Nelore didn't look like Nelore anymore. They became a little bit shorter, a little bit bigger bodied. The bulls were very masculine. The females were fat. They had less bone. But once they started doing the cycle enough and people realized that the productivity involved in it, it's again become one of the sought after herds that people go through. So, like where I came from too in the Stormberg, we did a bit of it. I wish we had done more. I wish I'd stayed long enough to see the whole process. There's certain phenotypes that can do it. And those phenotypes aren't necessarily what the industry thinks is a good cow at the moment. So we're going to have to rearrange how we, one man's treasure is another man's trash. So we're going to have to reevaluate what a functional, good-looking cow looks like in order to get there. And it's not overnight, and it's going to be a process where we slowly turn our bull mothers into cows that calved from 2 and then every year after that. Does that make sense? Yeah. 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 And the what I'd say there is, like in this hall, if you had a hall like this with however many seats there are, and then you had a hall that was 50% bigger than this, but with the same amount of seats, that other hall's not very practical because it takes more electricity to run it, it's harder to clean it, like the maintenance is more, but it's still got the same amount of seats. And the stunning thing that we realized so we were running cows on 5 properties in 5 very different environments, from Otjiwarongo and Kobabis, Cullinan, Eastern Cape and Mauritius, totally different environments. But what we realized is a practical sized cow weans a bigger calf than a big cow. Not the same size calf. The big cow doesn't wean the same percentage. The big cow gives you a small calf. And for me, that was enough to start thinking about how we work. But this isn't a quick fix. This is a slow process of changing phenotypes and changing perception about what a practical animal actually looks like. Getting back to Boran, there's a herd in Australia called CPC, Consolidated Pastoral Company. They run 9.5 million acres, so what's that, 4.5 million hectares? I don't know, something like that. 400,000 cows and 50,000 merino ewes and 60,000 Burgo does, okay? They've got 5,000 Boran cows. Okay? They calve at 2 and at 3. They've got 30,000 Brahman cows, and they calve at 2 and at 3. Do you know why? Because when they got Troy Setter, their manager, up from Melbourne to go manage and set everything in, he didn't know that cows calved at 3 for the first time. So he forced them to also calve at 2, and a lot of the popular genetics disappeared. But the next thing, people realized this guy's actually calving Boran and Brahman at 2 years old, and the only reason he did it is because he didn't know that he couldn't do it. So, yeah, I know it's not easy, but it is something we're going to have to think about, because I think the next generation is going to challenge us on it. Yeah. There's a question.
PJ, thank you. I think we are at the end of our session, so I think we can give PJ a good hand.
Okay, thanks PJ. Yeah, I just want to finish up.
Ons het 'n lucky draw hierso, en dis onder een van die stoele, so moet nou nie hardloop vir julle stoele soos musical chairs nie, maar die ou wat gelukkig is, ergens soek onder een van die stoele, gaan julle 'n lucky draw hê. Dit is van Uitkyk, en dit is 'n reënbestande PS6. So hierso is 'n kaartjie, daar is hy. Nee, dis joune. So Etienne van Uitkyk, hy het dit gereël en gesponsor. So ons wil net vir hom dankie sê, en dis ergens hier op een van sy bakkies. So Uitkyk MP. Dan wil ons net ook van hierdie geleentheid gebruik maak, as ons net die mense daar buite se aandag ook kry. Ons het 'n mosie hierso en dit is met groot hartseer wat ons ook wil noem van, hy was een van ons bestuurslede, WP Pretorius, se seun Wim, wat verlede week oorlede is in 'n tragiese ongeluk. Ek dink as ons maar net in 'n oomblik ons hoofde buig vir 'n vertoning van eerbied. Dankie. Dan gaan ons nou oor na ons bedankings toe. PJ, yet again, thank you. We appreciate your time and the effort you've done to come out and give us your knowledge and your input. Thank you so much. Dan aan al ons borge, ek gaan hulle nou net vandag by die maatskappye se name noem. So 'n dag is nie moontlik as die borge, die maatskappye nie inklap en deel maak en so 'n dag fasiliteer nie. Weereens aan Afriwet, Alpha Agri, Belfast Slaghuis, Supervleis, Biominerale Westford, BKB, Blinkwater Slaghuis, Blinkwater Veervoere, NBM, Central Wet, Hypra, HRA, Makelaars, Jekyll, Dexters, Karoo Oes, Meerkat Online Veilingsplatform, Mpumalanga Brangus, MSD Dieregesondheid, MS Trading, Feedtech, Nutrofeed, Ubaru, TWK, VKB, Voermol, Zoetis, Ilanko. Kom ons gee vir hierdie borde ook 'n handklap. Dan Tian Lessing vir die klank. Ons waardeer jou moeite ook in die opstel en die help. Tian, jy was van groot hulp vandag gewees. Aan Francine en Chris Meiburg vir hulle vir ons vandag beskikbaar gestel het. Ons waardeer julle moeite. En dan ons bestuur, Martinus en Tini, Jacques, Derek, Goody, dankie vir al julle reëlings om die dag ook moontlik te gemaak het. Julle effort wat julle ingesit het om die borge te reël en ook hier te wees vandag. En dan wil ek in besonder Annika uitsonder, dis ons sekretaresse, sy kon ongelukkig weens werkomstandighede nie hier gewees het vandag nie. Annika het baie hoe sê hulle, agter elke suksesvolle man staan 'n vrou, nou agter Annika, en in haar besigheid wil ons net ook vir Annika ook 'n handeklap gee. Marie, ons vorige sekretaresse wat gou ingestaan het vir Annika, baie dankie Marie, op kort kennisgewing dat jy ons gehelp het. Janus vir die reël van die projekter, baie dankie Janus, ons waardeer dit. Nelis wat Oom Dani se braaier ook op kort kennisgewing gereël het, en dan die braaiers wat ook net nou gaan help met die voorbereiding van die vleis. As ek so vandag kyk, dan is dit op die einde van ons program. Ek dink ek gaan vir ons sommer net 'n gebed sal wees, dan sluit net die oë. Ons almagtige Vader, ons dankie vir weer eens 'n geseënde dag wat U in ons lewens toegevoeg het. Vader, ons wil nou vra as dit U dag by sy bestemming sal uitkom. Vader, ons wil vra, maak ons. Dankie julle.